Greetings, I'm Thema Bryant, the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association, and I am pleased to wish you a happy National Arab American Heritage Month. To celebrate this month, we have two of our premier scholars in this area, and I'm happy to have them introduce themselves. We'll start on today with Dr. Awad and then be followed by Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant, for inviting us to speak to you today. We're very excited for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Germine Awad, and I am a professor at the University of Michigan. I study identity and discrimination among Arab and MENA Americans. I'm also the current president of the American, Middle Eastern, North African Psychological Association and one of the co-founders. Thanks for having us today.
Oh, you are welcome. Glad that you're here. And Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant, for this opportunity. I'm happy to join you all today and for Arab American Heritage Month. My name is Dr. Sawssan Ahmed, and I am Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at California State University, Fullerton, and a clinical psychologist, and I am the representative from AMENA Psi to the APA's Council of Representatives. And I study risk and resilience in Arab Americans and cultural competence in mental health delivery for Arabs and American Muslims.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. When we think about culture, we recognize the importance of a strengths-based perspective, and we also know the importance of a positive sense of identity. So I would like to ask you both from a personal standpoint, what are one or two experiences that helped you to have an empowered sense of your own cultural identity? And I'll start again with you, Dr. Awad.
Well, I mean, one of the things I actually always tell my students is, as an Egyptian American, my father especially instilled a lot of Egyptian pride. So if I was struggling in school, he was like, "You're Egyptian. You're smarter than everybody else." I mean, it may not have been true, but that's what I internalized. Not that I was smarter than everyone else. I clearly realized when I was in AP math and, high school, like, "Ooh, this is not helping me just being Egyptian. I think I have to study." But I did grow up with a lot of pride in being Egyptian and knowing like how important that was to my identity. And I think it helped me stay strong. Especially in spaces in which our identities were not affirmed or visible. And so, I think just being kind of told about the positive contributions of our people was really, I feel like empowering to me when I was especially a kid. And I try to do the same thing with my own children, but not by trying to, talk about superiority or any of these type of things. But more of like, you should take pride in your African heritage. That's both East Africa and West Africa.
That is so beautiful. I love that messaging from our parents and that socialization, passing down those messages. And I think it is key when we think about academics, because sometimes the message is kind of in spite of that you can achieve, but to say, based in your identity, you have the capacity for greatness is really beautiful message. And Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah, so I thought about this question, and I always think of it from sort of a developmental perspective, kind of like Gigi's talking about. So growing up, my Egyptian American parents as well, emphasized a lot of pride in our culture and religion, and they. I would go to school, and then after school, I would have to take all these Arabic classes, extra Arabic classes. And I really found it difficult and sort of dreaded it. Arabic is not the easiest language to learn. But at 17 years old, I moved away from, as all, kids do in America around that age, moved away to college. And I happened to, find out that I had to take a language class to fulfill, a GE requirement. So I took an Arabic class, and because I said, hey, this will be easy for me. It wasn't easy. But what I've sort of started to fall in love with the language for the first time. I had a professor who would have us read these in Arabic, these lyrics of Kulthum, who is an Egyptian singer who kind of sings these long, like 50-minute ballads, and they're very poetic. And we would, and coincidentally, she was also my father's favorite singer, God rest his soul, and we would listen to it on the car, on the way to school and things like that. So learning the language, learning these lyrics, and having this professor who was kind of, not Arab, who was so interested in the language, I kind of started to take more classes. Eventually, I took a second major in Arabic studies and learned, the literature, the history. I fell in love with Edward Said's writings, Naguib Mahfouz, and it just connected me to have so much. It impacted me till this day on a personal and professional level. And as a side note, when I was a child, one day I think I was looking at my old Social Security card or something, and I saw the name Suzanne on it, and I learned that my parents named me Suzanne when I was born. That's on my birth certificate. And later, they had changed it to Sawssan, which is the Arabic equivalent of Suzanne. And I just thought that was really, they kind of set me from the beginning to develop this kind of strong sense of self and strong Arab identity by choosing to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so rich as we think about the power of language, of music and poetry. And so glad that you received those seeds early on in your home and then followed up with that in college. We know when we think about culture that there are the realities of cultural resources, protective factors, and strengths. And so I'll ask each of you to share one or two that you think help people to cope and perhaps even to thrive. I'll start with you, Dr. Ahmed.
Sure. So this is actually something I study in research. So hopefully I can answer it. So I think one that I always think about, and I try to study this empirically, is focus on community. In Arabic, we call that ummah. And the idea is that everyone is part of one community, and that you help each other, you rely on each other, you build each other up. When someone's struggling, you figure out a way to help them. And I see this, as I sort of grew up in this. Whenever someone had a problem, they'd come to me. I think that's why I went into psychology. They'd go to my parents, and if there was like a family problem or marital problem or financial problem, it's not uncommon to hear people gathering to raise money for somebody who needs it for some medical issue or something else. And I think knowing that you have that backbone, that whatever happens, that if someone is struggling, there's someone that can help them. If someone is doing well, they go out and they find people that they can help. I think is a cultural strength. And then another one I can think of is just the focus on faith and spirituality. We know in Arab culture and MENA cultures that regardless of what your religious affiliation is, that there's a reliance on faith and spirituality and this connection to kind of a higher power, and that a lot of people draw hope from that. It's not uncommon to hear people, regardless of their religious affiliation, say things like inshallah after a statement, speaking about the future. They say, this will happen, or I'm going to go do this, inshallah. And I use it actually in my everyday language. And again, you can find this all over the Arab world and in the US as well. And saying something good happens, you say mashallah, that's what God willed. So again, there's this kind of connection that there's something beyond you, and I find that to be a source of strength for the community.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so rich to hear and lovely to hear about it being really prominent even in our language and in conceptualizing will and possibility. And Dr. Awad.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for asking that question. I believe it's so important to highlight the positive aspects of our culture. One of the things that I really love about being Egyptian and sort of Arab and MENA folks generally is how we center family and the importance of family. And it really comes from a collectivist, tradition. But the idea that you really have such a built-in social support, such a strong, you can really rely on your family if you ever get into trouble or if you ever need anything. And it's so ingrained as a value that even with little things like a birthday party at somebody's house, everybody in the family helps you clean up before they leave, because they know that it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that, you're not in it alone and doing everything by yourself, that it is, you never feel alone, and you never feel like you don't have support. And so that social support is such a important strength that we have in our community that, frankly, for me, I lived far away from my family for many years, and I just recently have a chance of coming back to be close to them again. And I get to experience that once again, where if I need anything, I can call on, my siblings, my mother, my cousins, and they will do whatever I need. And it goes as far as that if, there is if there are financial needs, it's not uncommon for, family to give interest-free loans and help with the huge sums of money, knowing that, it's important for the betterment of the entire family. So the collectivist sort of values and centering family is a core strength that doesn't get talked about within this community enough, but is so integral to the mental health and well-being of our people.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And it was one of the things I was struck by when recently I was able to attend the Middle East Psychological Association conference in Kuwait, and just socially seeing people really gather as families and being able to go out at night, and just seeing people organized and collected by families. And interestingly, a number of restaurants that had like a play area for kids, which I just thought was so beautiful. So that richness and being able to connect and support each other is really important. So there are many Arab American and Middle Eastern psychologists that have contributed to the field. And while many are members of the American Psychological Association, I think it is so important for people to know that AMENA Psi is its own organization, is an independent organization. And I wonder if you can speak to the importance and the value of having your own space organizationally. Dr. Awad.
Yeah, we were a group of us were really excited about starting AMENA Psi and felt like it was necessary. This was shortly after the Hoffman report came out, and we didn't have an organization to be able to respond to the Hoffman report. And so we only had a network at the time. And so a group of us got together and came up with a steering committee that had representation from different fields within psychology, and also different countries represented in the MENA region. And we decided to, do a retreat, write the bylaws so that we can have our own organization. I have always been connected to ABPSI and other ethnic minority psychological associations. And so I felt like we needed a voice, and we needed to show that we were independent. And we needed to also educate folks about who we are and the psychological issues specifically with our community. And so to have a space just to gather graduate students and early career folks and mid and late career folks has been incredibly important. And just also to have a voice in terms of advocacy and visibility. I mean, we have a lot of strengths within our communities, but we also have problems that we need to solve. And you need an organization to sort of gather all of the resources together so that we can be able to have a voice and a presence in these psychological spaces and beyond, frankly. So I think that, one of the things that warms my heart is that I get to see graduate students have something that me and Sawssan did not have. And so we would just blindly try to find each other at conferences, just because there was really not a visible presence. And now the fact that that is not something that these students have to go through in the same way is just, it makes all the difference. And it's already sort of one of the goals of why we created this organization in the first place. And also to be able to speak up in terms of issues regarding, our people and speak with APA and other organizations that sort of want more information or want our input. So it's been invaluable and crucial, especially in terms of recognition of our ethnic minority experience that doesn't tend to get recognized.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think the work that you all do is so incredible. And I want to give a plug for your conference that people should definitely attend. You learn so much, and you also hear the range of experiences, which I think is so important. And speaking of the range of experiences, Dr. Ahmed, you talked about the range of religious backgrounds, and among a number of Arab Americans, there is the Islamic faith. And so I wonder if you could speak some to perspectives on integrating Islamic principles with psychotherapy for Muslim American clients.
Sure, I'd be happy to speak on that. I think being a clinical psychologist, I sort of have some lived experience in incorporating kind of Islamic principles into psychotherapy. And one of the things that I like to kind of talk about and emphasize that I think a lot of times we think about mental health and mental health services, obviously from a Western perspective. Even when we learn about the history of psychology, we don't hear about other histories of psychologies. And what we know is from what we understand, one of the first psychiatric hospitals in the world was actually developed and opened in Baghdad in Iraq in the 7th and 8th century. So there is this rich tradition of psychology and psychotherapy in Islamic history and Arab history. And one of the things in doing psychotherapy, I like to tell my clients, I think a lot of times there's a lot of stigma around having mental illness or having and feeling bad, and that it being a sign of like weak faith, that if you're struggling psychologically. And I like to tell my clients that in our tradition, in our Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was a great figure in Islam. We study his history and his life as Muslims, and he experienced what was called a year of sadness after his wife and his uncle passed away. And in that history and tradition, we learn about that, how he went through the process of grief and how he struggled with it and how he was sad. And he was, I don't know if we could say he was clinically depressed, but that's part of our tradition, and that that it's part of human experience to feel sadness, to go through grief, and that it doesn't mean that you are a weak person or you don't have faith. And I find that very uplifting for clients to hear about, because I think a lot of times they hear otherwise from their family and community, that they shouldn't be sad, they shouldn't be depressed. That means that they don't have faith in God. And then the other principle that I like to use or think about is this idea, we call it husn al-dhan, which is having positive expectations, and specifically towards like God, and that God, has a plan for you, and that plan is good. And I always think of that as like cognitive restructuring, having good expectations, looking at things and thinking that, that is possible, something good will happen. So those are some Islamic principles that I think I find that are helpful for clients.
Thank you so much. I think those examples are so rich, especially because I know sometimes in faith communities there can be this idea that we're supposed to always be happy or just always supposed to feel peaceful. And so being able to name that despair, grief, or depression, I think is so important to create space for healing. So a big part of my work during the presidential year is addressing trauma, grief, and oppression. And I know all three of those show up within the Arab American community. And one of the things people often wonder about are solutions or what is being done. And so I wonder if you could each share either an intervention on an individual level or on a community level that's being done to address either of those, trauma, grief, or oppression. And I'll start with Dr. Awad.
Sure. So I can speak about what my work is primarily based on. And so I have spent a lot of time working on getting a federal category to measure and have a racial and ethnic category for MENA folks generally. And the reason why this is an important issue is that we don't have federal level data collection. And we therefore can't accurately get at disparities. And so one of the things that we've been fighting for is for the Office of Management and Budget to redefine their race and ethnicity categories and add a MENA category so that everybody who uses any kind of demographic form in the United States will then have to, by minimal sort of reporting standards, have a MENA category on their forms. And this will help essentially all the research and all of the different work that's being done in institutions so that we can actually figure out exactly what's happening and then be able to tailor and target communities for intervention. And so what is actually happening right now is that we're in the process, the Office of Management and Budget is in the process of rethinking how they classify race and ethnicity in the United States. And there is a federal register notice because they released new guidelines, proposed guidelines that does include a MENA category. And so we're on our way to have this and start to truly collect data and help not only researchers, but interventionists, clinicians, everybody actually working with this community so that we can understand exactly what's going on to be able to provide solutions. And so that's sort of the advocacy side of my work and in my research on, identity and discrimination and how this community identifies itself and how they sort of cope with their ethnic minority experiences that involve discrimination and oppression. So we're on our way. We're being hopeful. I'm working with groups at the federal level to help them figure out the best way to go about doing this. But I would say that is a huge intervention that people don't think about that would help a lot with pretty much every sector that you could think of that involves Arab and MENA folks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for naming that because we know we need the data, right, to make the case, to build the case for what is needed, resources or interventions that are needed. And so if the question isn't even asked or that data isn't collected, it's hard to go to the next step. So thank you for that important work. And Dr. Ahmed.
I want to highlight what Gigi said because Gigi's been working on this for a while, and we've in our writings we talk about this a lot. Is that without the classification and the categorization and not knowing who the community is, that invisibility has kind of impeded actually the development of research and interventions because we know that if we identify that there's a need, we're able to kind of apply for grants, there's funding sources, and right now that doesn't exist. So a lot of the work that's being done is being done by a lot of cultural institutions, but not a lot has been done. It's hard to have large scale research studies. It's hard to develop interventions because there's no resources because there's invisibility of the community and it's hard to find actually find the community as well because we don't know how to identify them. I think there are a lot of sort of micro interventions that are happening across the U.S. There's a lot of these organizations that are doing wonderful work. There's Access in Michigan, who does a lot of advocacy work. They do a lot of social work and mental health services for the community there. There's the National Arab American Museum that's in Michigan, and I know there's the Arab American Council. So I know locally, I'm from the Southern California area. We just got designation for one part part of Anaheim to be designated as Little Arabia. And I think, again, there's these like micro things that are happening across the country with the little resources that we have because of the lack of identification. And I find, I see hope in that. I think that, with the work that Gigi's doing and the work that I know, I think, I'm hopeful that by the next census we'll have a category. I think we'll start to be seeing more and more kind of research, more and more interventions that are being developed that are specifically for MENA folks. But without that category, it's kind of been a huge impediment. So.
Wonderful. And you kind of sensed my next question, which was about hope. And, you both are doing a lot of trailblazing work. And when you do that kind of work, I just know there are challenges seen and unseen, spoken and unspoken. And so, trying to think of what fuels you or feeds you that keeps you engaged so that your efforts are sustainable. And Dr. Awad, I'll come to you.
Well, I will say when I was a graduate student and I was in Division 45 as a student, I mean, Division 45 was my home, and I was so excited to have something. And I just remember there was a ceremony in which the members at large were giving gifts to the incoming president. And I just in that moment felt that Arab AMENA was missing and that we are so invisible. And I just remember just the need of wanting to find anybody that did any of this work and couldn't find anyone. And I went up to someone with an Egyptian name and I was like, your name's Egyptian. And, the person was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't identify. And I just remember being so deflated and just wanting just our community to be somewhere. And what sustains me is seeing graduate students get so excited and other folks in my, also where I am, all of us professionals getting excited to see one another and have a community and have so many folks, also allies and co-conspirators outside of our community helping with kind of increasing our visibility. And I just have seen a huge change since I was a graduate student and what this has sort of done, having increasing visibility and having spaces in which our people are even acknowledged as existing within this field, and also existing the contributions of our people to this field that oftentimes goes unnoticed. So what fuels me is seeing the next generation. What fuels me is helping train the next generation of researchers and clinicians and other folks to serve our community, and really just feeling bright about the future. I'm so excited. Youth really are, they are killing it in terms of what they're doing. So I'm just excited. I'm just excited to sit back and watch what happens. And that is all that I've ever really wanted. And I get to watch that. So that's what fuels me. I do it for our community. I do it for our people because, we need it and we deserve it. And, it's necessary.
I love that. Seeing the void, seeing the need for it and filling it for yourself, but then also seeing everyone who benefits from that. Dr. Ahmed.
So my answer may sound pretty similar. I think there's a group of us that had a similar experience that we were in graduate school. We couldn't find anybody like us. We eventually, a few of us found each other. And I think, and there was very, very little work that was being done on our community to help our community, to give voice to our community. And it's so uplifting to see that there are so many students now there, and they're not just students, there's, scholars, there's therapists that are going into the field, that really there's more and more access to, culturally competent services and providers, and more research to tell us about, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are we struggling with psychologically. And that's very inspiring, because when we started out, Gigi and I, and there's a few other of us, I can mention Mona Amer, Mary Kia Keating, we really didn't have much people to look towards and to kind of to inspire us and to kind of lift us up. And so we together, I think a lot of us found each other and slowly kind of lifted each other up, encouraged each other. But I think just seeing that those numbers are growing and that the scholarship is getting better and there's excellence and all coming out of that is very kind of inspiring. And I think that, and I think just the new generation is just it's there. And like Gigi said, I am finding so much, and I have always, in this kind of the mentorship that I had since I was that 17-year-old at UCLA, starting to my first foray into like research is from allies, from other folks of scholars of color who took me under their wing and kind of developed me and encouraged me and motivated me, and I continue to find strength in that, and I continue to strength with my colleagues from SIP and AAPA and ABSI and LPA, and doing work with them has also been very uplifting, and it sustains me, and it's good to see our commonalities and the things we can work towards together to better our communities.
Beautiful. Well, I am a lover of poetry, proverbs, music, lyrics. And so to close out our celebration, I'm going to ask if each of you can share a quote with us, whether from poetry or music, that can help us to continue to celebrate Arab American heritage. Dr. Awad.
Yeah, so this was really hard for me, but I do like a poem by Khalil Gibran. And I'm not going to read the whole poem, but I will give you my favorite line. And my favorite line is, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked." And this idea that your joy and sorrow live in the same place, and sort of that, due to the extent you can experience great joy, you will experience great sorrow, but that those things work in concert and it's part of life. And it's actually a beautiful thing to be able to feel deeply both joy and sorrow, and they live in the same space. And I think it just kind of thinking about emotionality and why it's important to really kind of take care of yourself and understand that. And so that's my favorite line.
Thank you. I love that. And recognizing that connection instead of them being on total opposites, right? Dr. Ahmed.
Okay, so I'm going to read a poem, but it's a short poem. It is by one of my favorite Arab American, actually Palestinian American activists and poets, Suhair Ahmed. And when you asked that question earlier, I always she's a spoken word artist, and I find that one thing that uplifts our community is celebration and joy, and regardless of what's going on. So this poem is called Talisman, and I'm going to read it. It starts with, "It is written, the act of writing is holy words, are sacred, and your breath brings out the God in them. I write these words, quickly repeat them, softly to myself, this talisman for you. Fold this prayer around your neck, fortify your back with these whispers. May you walk ever loved and in love. Know the sun for warmth, the moon for direction. May these words always remind you your breath is sacred. Words bring out the God in you."
So beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you for that blessing. And I hope that we all receive it. And thank you for helping us to celebrate Arab American Heritage Month. Take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us.